So I just want to welcome everybody to our sixth training in our series of six, and this is called Restorative Justice Practices, Site Implementation and Sustainability. And this is our kind of brand new training. So as Robert had said, we'll have all six of these once we get into the post editing and get it online for you. We had one person email us today, couldn't get here today, but she definitely is looking forward to at least seeing the recording. So, all right. So, today we'll have a small group, which is kind of nice for us because we'll have some ability to kind of do some things just in the larger group, even though we can still have some time to break out. So, what we want to do today is to facilitate an experience with participants to increase understanding of restorative justice practices, site implementation, and sustainability, along with essential components and considerations. We want to increase understanding of the importance of developing a restorative justice practices site team to help guide and sustain the implementation process. We'll be talking about some implementation science that's connected with this, and I hope that it'll be helpful to you. And then I want to, Tamara, would you be willing to read off our community agreements here?
Sure. Community agreement offerings. Confidentiality, mandated reporting, take care of your own needs, listen without interruptions or judgment, be authentic and honest, share the air, show kindness and care for others, be empathetic and compassionate, only share helpful comments in discussions and the chat forum, and assume best intentions.
All right. Thank you, Tamara. So this is, I know we checked, and I'm just going to stop for a moment just to make sure that everybody's still good with these, or if we need to change anything or anything like that. But if you're good with it, if we can get a thumbs up from you, and you can either do your emoji reaction. Thank you, Jen Hansel. All right. So one thing we want to do is we want to kind of have that little mindfulness moment, and my background kind of reminds me of my mindfulness experience over there in Yosemite in June. I took this photo, and I really love Yosemite. Just amazing, wonderful, life-giving place for me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to end up sharing my screen, and we'll just use our video that we sometimes will use as our mindfulness, just kind of maybe nature, take some deep nurturing breaths. We can look down to the birds and some music. Have a chance for ground restoration. sun gives us warmth and light. life, the air, the flowers, and the beauty of nature. Just pause it there. So it just kind of gives us that moment to just center ourselves and be ready. And I think what I'll do is this, since we are kind of a smaller group, I think what I'd like to do is just do a quick check-in. People can do that verbally. And we can still use the 1 through 10 that we used yesterday. So, 1 meaning you feel awful, 10 meaning you feel amazing. But just let us know why. And I know I started off this morning kind of a little bit shaky because I woke up extremely early in the morning, and I mean like more like around 1 o'clock in the morning. And so by 7, 8 o'clock, I was kind of not feeling all that good. And so, but I have to say that, preparing this and being with you all, I don't know, there's some kind of like a energy that I get from that. So I actually feel, believe it or not, right now, I think I feel about a 9, which is crazy, because if you'd asked me like at 7 or 8 this morning, I would say, I feel like about a 2. But that's the way it is, right? Things impact us. So let me ask Lisa, if you don't mind. Lisa, how are you today?
I am about an 8 today, and similar to you, I kind of had a restless night, so my energy level's low. But everything is well. I just feel like I'm not at 100, my normal energy level. But I'm excited to be here and looking forward to getting some new information and collaborating with everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, Lisa. And Tamara, what about you?
I think I'm about a 9. I just have pain in my neck, so you'll always see me doing my stretches, but a 9.
All right. Well, it's great that you're with us, and I feel for that neck issue that you have. I hope that you'll be comfortable here. And then Erica?
I'd say a 7. I stay working from home due to some cold symptoms, so also laying low. But my emotions are great because I always love being here.
All right. Thank you, Erica. That's great. Even though I know a couple of us might not be feeling all that well, that's great that you still continue to come. Thank you. And Robert?
Oh, today I'm feeling probably about 8 or 9. I had needed my phone. I'd broken it, so I was able to get it repaired. And so just realizing how much I use it for reference or contacting anybody. And so it's feels a little bit more normal today and catching up a bit. So nice to be with everyone too.
Yeah, we all can appreciate that one, Robert. We're like, our phones are just so essential these days. So thank you. And then Lon?
Hi, everyone. I would say I'm a 7. I have a little bit less pain today, so that's good. And I'm standing right now, so I got my standing desk to help with some of that back pain. So I'm chilling.
Good. Thank you, Lon. Thank you also for coming here despite having that back pain. And know this, that, feel free to move around, stretch, we're not going to make fun of you. we got your back. All right. And then Jen Vermillion with her baby, by the way.
Hi, everyone. I also wrote it in the chat, but I just said I'd probably say at about a 5. It's kind of a crazy day. My husband had to go leave for a funeral just a little bit ago. And so then I'm also going to be hopping on and off, getting my son on his Zoom school calls, then with baby, and then I got to pick up the other kid at preschool later. And then I'm just not physically feeling well. I'm kind of dealing with some stomach issues today. So also just kind of like the other Jen, just kind of laying low for today.
Thank you, Jen, for being here and, for just toughing through it. And everything that you're doing. Obviously, Lucy there with you is so beautiful, and we love seeing her with us too. So if she wants to check in, she can just go goo goo gaga or whatever she does. All right. So thank you, everybody. When you have a smaller group like this, you can obviously do verbal or chat. So it's good for us to know how our colleagues are doing because we can that helps us grow in understanding and even in empathy for each other, right? Even though we're in that virtual format, it's our way of saying, hey, we still care about you, right? You're important to us. What I'm going to do is, I would ask some of you, to just read through some of our slides, and if you have any comments on it, you're welcome to share any comments. But so, Erica, would you be willing to just read this one for us, please?
The foundational work of building trust and respect with students and staff, Tier 1, is essential if we're going to be effective while intervening during conflict, Tier 2 and 3.
And Erica, do you feel comfortable commenting on that?
Yeah, I think that is pretty basic, right? That it speaks to the proactive nature. I think frequently when we think of restorative justice, it's like something to do, a circle, like after something's happened. But really, as with most things, it's can be more effective to do the proactive work. So building a restorative culture, as practiced through the mutual trust, the foundation of trust, and then hopefully that precludes or movement towards Tier 2 and 3.
Absolutely, Erica. And I have the kind of privilege of, having been here in San Diego County, kind of starting, I guess, some of this restorative practices work. And what I noticed in the very beginning, about 9 years ago or so, schools did exactly the opposite. They were really focused on the Tier 2 and Tier 3 when they had to intervene. They went in and they started doing these kind of conflict interventions, trying to use the restorative practices, right? Which many of them didn't understand completely, but they went for it because they heard, hey, this is the thing to do. And honestly, many of them, for many of them, it kind of failed in some ways because when it's not doing what you just said, Erica, where you talked about laying the foundation of building trust and respect, that's what the other work is built on. And when you don't have that and you try to intervene using the restorative kind of strategies, it sometimes will fall on its face. And I found in the beginning, a lot of educators were kind of like being very critical of restorative practices. They were saying things like, well, this doesn't work. And that's the thing is what they were doing at their school. You're right, it doesn't work because they weren't doing it correctly, right? It's kind of like when somebody, makes some kind of recipe, but they don't actually follow the recipe. They kind of throw this and that and the other in there, and all of a sudden people are going, this is not working well, it's not tasting right, Well, that's because you didn't follow the recipe. So we're trying now to promote this thing of make sure that you start with Tier 1. It's so essential. And then let me ask, how about if I could ask Lisa, would you read this one for us, Lisa?
Yes. Begin with staff first. Hold staff and department meetings in circles. Ensure that staff have access to regular check-ins and become accustomed to using circles. You are planting seeds that are allowing staff to experience the benefits of RJP without being forced to implement as a whole school initiative.
And Lisa, would you be willing just to comment anything that you've read here, if it sort of either you have a question or you have a comment on any of it?
I do have a question and I do have a comment.
Okay.
The comment is that I do have regular check-ins with my staff. So we do what we call a ground zero meeting. Since we've returned, we haven't done it, trying to figure out how that's going to look, because we're trying to limit gatherings. Yeah. So it may be via Zoom for this school year, But in the past, we would do ground zero meetings, and we always had like some type of text that we were reading, even if it was an article or a book that we were studying as a whole, that was supportive, and we would discuss it and, you know, have different activities around that. And staff really loved that and enjoyed it. I got a lot of positive feedback about that. And then I have one-on-ones. For some staff, it's every week, and for others, it's every other week, where they get 10 to 15 minutes to just come in and do a check-in. And it's not about task lists. It's about, what do you need? You know, how are you doing? It's just really a check-in on how they're feeling and how they're feeling about the work, but not going over a list of items. My question would be, what does it look like to have, when you say meetings in circles, what does that look like?
Yeah. So what we try to promote is, even before, you know, like an official kind of like, hey, we're gonna try to be a restorative school, or we're gonna implement restorative justice practices. You know, as an administrator, you can certainly hold meetings in a circle. You know, of course, you know, with COVID restrictions, things do, you know, obviously there's other restrictions. Sometimes you have to do it via Zoom, like you were saying. Or you can do it out. I've had these circles outside, but what I've noticed is just the use of circles is a extremely beneficial thing for any leader, because what happens is the circle actually holds space, and it holds people kind of accountable to each other, where when they're not in circle and they're at tables or whatever, it kind of lends to people kind of disengaging and going on to their electronics and checking emails and texts and Facebook and who knows what. And that's really not how a meeting should be run. You know, a meeting should be run about, hey, this is our time together. This is ground zero. This is our time to come together and see each other. So if I was there, you know, seeing somebody like Lisa, you know, that's important as a human being. I see her, I see her body language. She sees mine, and we hold each other accountable, and we're also responsible to each other. And when I hear, for example, Lisa say something like, hey, you know, I woke up, you know, much earlier, had a restless night. You know, it elicits understanding and empathy in me. And that's humanizing Lisa for me. And I really, really, really promote the humanization of all of our staff. They need to know who each other are as human beings. We share, you know, we share a lot of the things that we hear in check-in, even though check-in can be very quick. You know, I've had back pain before. You know, I've had, you know, years of problems with my back. So I can relate and feel for Lon, who is a part of our virtual circle today. Why? Because she had a chance to say it. If she wouldn't have had a chance to say it in circle like we have right now, I would have no clue that Lon is having back trouble, or that she has ever had back trouble. So what it is it humanizes her to me. I connect with her, and I can start to have that feeling like, Lon, you know, when we say in Lakesh, because you are the other me. And that's kind of, I don't know, does that make sense, Lisa?
I've actually helped and actually coached principals through how to use circles in faculty meetings in this very useful, tangible way. Not that check-ins aren't useful, but I can just give you some examples of how it went. So a specific set of circles that I can think about was about when the schools were returning back to in person. Yeah. And so this principal actually wanted to help their staff, kind of meet some of their more emotional needs and around the uncertainty and stresses. And so what we did in the circle was really, use the problem, kind of problem solve in circle. And it was, we had asked several prompts, and that's where the prompts become really important. What are some, what's an opportunity, or what's a kind of bright spot, and what's a challenge? And then as people went around kind of sharing their concerns about like returning or concerns about the issue at hand, what it really did was I thought I saw this unfold, and I thought it was really really cool, that people were like, oh, I'm really worried about how am I going to engage, because they were simulcasting. How am I going to engage my, students at home while I'm also teaching in class, or I'm really, concerned about having to use this technology, or, whatever. So like, as people kind of went around and, shared their concerns, what ended up happening was you saw people go, wait, I can help you with that. I can help you with that. And actually outside of the circle is where they started connecting. And because, look at the teacher got to bring up their concern. Oh, I don't know how to use this program and I'm supposed to be relying on it. Well, the other person in the circle heard that, like, hey, I'll come to your your classroom right after this, and let's figure it out. Let's walk through it. And so that's actually like, I kind of think about one of the potential for circles is of solving a problem that we collectively have. And so I would also think too, like faculty meetings, like the whole thing doesn't have to be in circle, or you can mix it up and have like oftentimes I know like there's like PLC groups. So like, how can we do that in a circle fashion? Because I know, for example, in PLCs I've been in, there's always the dominant voices. And there's like the quieter teachers, who are just kind of like scoping it out. So like playing around with the format, depending on the size of your staff, it's totally all possible. And I have some more kind of like very specific ideas, but yeah, that's just like an example.
That's perfect. That's exactly, I think, what we needed to hear from you, Lon, to give those great ideas, practical ideas for people to clarify, what does this mean? Now, by the way, that school that's doing that type of work, they may not even officially be trying to implement fully as a whole school yet, right? So we're going to talk about what does it mean. Like really, if you look at that last bullet point on this, it says we're planting seeds, right? To allow the staff to experience the benefits of like what Lon was talking about, right? Where if you're in a circle and you're having a sequential circle, then it gives everybody the chance to speak, and people can feel like there's more equality, right? And in some ways there's more equity. So it's important, I think it's important to not just shove restorative practices down the throats of all of our staff, like, at one time, just kind of forcing them to do something that they don't understand, they don't see the value, and they haven't been prepared for. So we're talking about easing into this so that it's not just a kind of like a big bowling ball, just kind of making its way through a school. Because I've seen the effects of that, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we move on.
Well, I have a question though.
Yes, please.
On the slide we were just on.
Yes.
So beginning with staff first means that there's a leader, and maybe the leaders could be a little pressured. Are they getting enough of this? So, because I don't see in my district enough of leaders doing this.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They should be pressured, I think. I know we can't force, but they should at least be pressured to have support to try it out and demonstrate it to their staff, because then otherwise they're keeping it from their staff.
Yeah, no, you're right that I think they should be, I guess you can call the word pressured or motivated, so that the leaders should experience it even in circles with other leaders, so they can go, oh, I get it. Because if you experience it first, then you can actually share it. If you don't really understand it, if you're just you read some book somewhere and you want to just kind of do something and you don't really know what you're talking about, it might come across the wrong way. So it is important though, what you're saying, it's like that leaders, I believe all the leaders should be given this as strategies, because they're just practical strategies to build community and build relationship and create equality among staff. And they don't even have to call it restorative practices. It doesn't matter. You're planting seed.
Building culture.
Yes.
So we could push this type of culture. I just feel like I've just been sad because I've known about this since you started teaching me 9 years ago. And it's just, it's one of those things that you never see implemented that has been so important to me. And so
Yeah.
I do hold leadership very accountable for it.
And rightly so, Tamara, you're right. And because the leaders are responsible to be at least learning about, hey, what do we need to do to build community, especially in these times? We have this, we say small group discussion, but I think with this group, we might be able to stay in this larger group. But I do want to ask each of you this, and I think Tamara brought some of this up right now. But what are the biggest barriers to, I say your school, but any school, implementing and sustaining restorative justice practices as a whole school implementation? So what would be some of the barriers to that? And one of the things that Tamara just said, hey, what if the leader themselves are not restorative? And so how could you ever implement and sustain a whole school implementation? Well, there you go. That's one great barrier right there. So let me now just ask our group. I think what I want to do is I'm going to stop. Let me go ahead and share the screen here. And I appreciate everybody answering that for us. And then Jen Hansel, would you be willing to read this one for us? Overwhelmed by school initiatives?
Sure.
Thank you.
Be sensitive that school staff feel overwhelmed and oppressed by initiatives forced on them from school authorities. What could be a more respectful way of helping staff to embrace RJP as an initiative that they want and choose for their school? Try EdShare.
And then we'll just stay here, but I think what I would like is maybe an idea from you. Jen, you had mentioned in the chat that you're part of the kind of professional development committee, and obviously that's one way for you to kind of maybe bring in a respectful way of introducing this to staff. But what's your thoughts on that first sentence that you read?
Having gone through the equity training with SDCOE, and I've gone to a couple of equity conferences, I think that's the most overwhelming part, is the emotional feeling you get as a teacher, and being a teacher and a parent maybe, and other parts of your life that you feel as you're going through this process. And just to know that, and I've kind of said this before, to give grace and understand that everybody's in their own place on their journey. And you can't expect someone to be where you are, because I've been working on this for 4 or 5 years now, and there are staff members who this is going to be their first time hearing it, and I have to understand that they're just now starting to come to terms with their own, professional, like their own pedagogy, and how they're going to integrate this or implement this into their own practices, and to be patient and be kind and be supportive when I could be, wondering, why aren't you getting this? Everybody's in their own place, I guess.
That's really helpful. I think it goes back to that thing like that Tamara was saying about being patient, right? And that we know this is a long haul, right? This is not just like a little spurt of energy and we kind of like, okay, everybody get on board. But this is a long term kind of process of changing culture. So I wanted to ask Lisa, if you wouldn't mind, if you have any comments on this.
Yeah, just looking, overwhelmed by school initiatives. I think school staff are just overwhelmed, period, right now. I don't know about anyone else, but our school staff, there's a huge shortage. And so people are doing all kinds of things outside of their normal job descriptions. And there's a sense of just being overwhelmed. And I feel like looking at RJP as like another initiative that we want to implement could be daunting for school staff. But looking at how RJP could be supportive of, people feeling overwhelmed and being able to, you so beautifully explained about the circle creating time for that, just to honor staff and check in with staff and see where they are and try to offer supports, I think could be a way to introduce it to staff that aren't familiar with it, and for staff that are, to see it as something useful for them, as well as something that could be useful for students.
God, that's so good for me to hear this, Lisa, that you really articulated what I've been thinking about, that it's important for the staff to find like what's the benefit for them, right? And what you said is just right. They're overwhelmed. They need support. They can get support through these circle activities together. It doesn't have to be a big initiative like, hey, everybody's got to do this, but it's more like we can integrate this into our staff meetings in different ways we support each other. And then they can begin to go, this is good because it feels right for me. And maybe there's a way I could translate that with my students, because honestly, the students are coming pretty overwhelmed as well. So thank you for those great insights. And then let me ask, Lon, would you be willing to read this for us? Transparency with school data.
Sure. Share in a staff meeting your most current and district data that demonstrates the most essential victories and weaknesses. Celebrate the victories and ask staff to break out in small groups to reflect on the weaknesses. Developing and discussing intervention ideas to improve results. Then share their thoughts with a large group.
So this is pretty much saying, Lon, to have them, give them their current kind of local data, have them look at that, have them analyze it together, choose out the victories and the weaknesses, and then begin, obviously celebrate the victories, but really look at what is it that they feel is going to be the most important to try to tackle. And then, but do those in small groups and have it come back to the large group. Lon, what's your thought on that?
I was actually in one of my groups yesterday talking about this, where how so many faculty meetings, staff meetings, or even just the overall conversation is so focused on negative, lack, what's not being done right. These test scores aren't high, and so I think that this actually speaks to that celebration of what's going well, because you can only say our scores are low so many times before people start, when that's the narrative, it feels unmotivating. And so I kind of think that this is a good way to think about it, how we, naturally our human brains, just from an evolutionary perspective, we focus on the negative. That's what we do as humans. We see problems that we try to fix. And so really kind of doing this thing where it's not about being positive, because I know there's this rhetoric in education that's so much often about improve. And it's okay, but did you take sufficient time to say, here's what's happening, here's what's going well, not just to motivate people, but to be honest. I think there's some honesty there that's required for the effort or so I actually think it's a more accurate view of the data rather than always this, we need to improve this and this and this, so I think it's, that's just kind of what I was thinking about.
Go ahead, Jen.
I just want to say it has a lot to do with growth mindset. I mean, just like a kid who for years and years is told, oh, you're a bad kid, you're a bad kid, you're a bad kid. That kid looks for any possibility to have attention, even if it's negative attention. And I feel like you bring bad data, oh, you guys, here's our bad test scores, what are we going to do about it? I feel like it's a better reaction to say, look, here's all the great stuff you've done. Here's all the things we've accomplished in the last however many amount of time. And then, okay, so here's some data that we need to work on. So I'm going to give you that. And why don't you guys talk about how we can improve, and put that in the hands of the teachers and say, look, I want to hear from you. What are your ideas? That's a more positive culture than just blaming the teacher for all these bad test scores. That's
great, Jen. I really like the way you talked about, really celebrate those victories and acknowledge those, but then allow the teachers to be able to kind of say, let us look at the data. We've got ideas. We know, we know there's problems, but if like listen to us rather than just imposing on us what you think are the ways to intervene on these problems, because that empowers them. It gives them choice. It gives them voice. So that's really what we're looking for, is that really a way of utilizing even circles, small circle to large circle, things like that, to be able to even examine data together and have real discussions and make sure that positive is brought out, though. So Robert, I want to, just because we're close to 2:00, could we take a 5-minute break and a stretch break for us? Erica, are you available to read this for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Implementation, science, and continuous improvement. Number 1, exploration. Reviewing school data, conducting surveys, empathy interviews, and considering intervention models. Number 2, installation. Securing training, supports, data systems, and identifying committed pilot staff. Initial implementation. Students receive services with a focused group of educators, monitor initial data for improvements. Number 4, full implementation. At least 50% of educators committed and implementing, and outcomes showing improvements.
That's great. Thank you, Erica. Now, some of you are probably already aware of the implementation science. This is the basic kind of steps, right? And so when we're talking about implementing restorative justice practices, it really should follow similar steps to this. And it really needs to have in that what Tamara talked about earlier, patience, I think she was mentioning, right? And a long-term view, so that when you think of exploration, you shouldn't be going, oh, we're in exploration, so yeah, we're also implementing restorative practices. It's really a time where what you're doing is you're taking people through a process of exploration, installation, initial implementation, and then full implementation. And really, even full implementation in this kind of paradigm is not even saying that 100% are implementing, if you notice, right? But it's at least 50% of the people. So we're going to kind of, talk about this, kind of get through it, and kind of always try to relate it to that restorative justice practices, because sometimes I know, I think it was you, Erica, that mentioned some of the outliers and some of the naysayers, that they can really be a barrier. And part of trying to, I guess, deal with that is doing this kind of a process where you're actually taking the whole school through a process of reviewing the data and doing surveys and things like this. So, and the exploration process, and maybe what I'll do is just ask Jen, Jen Hansel, would you be willing to read this for us?
Absolutely. Exploration process. Take the time needed for the staff to explore different options to address issues at the school. You and other allies suggest RJP training for all staff to gain understanding, clarity, and learn how this can be practiced in the classroom and other parts of the school.
Thank you, Jen. So I'm not sure if this is clear, but you understand this being a part of the exploration process, and you're needing to take that time to go through a process with the staff at the school.
On the previous slide, it mentioned empathy interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important part of the staff development process, is to understand where they're coming from and what they think is important, and kind of what they see happening in their own classes, because I think a lot of staff, or my own colleagues, feel undervalued because they don't feel like anybody listens to what they have to say. So that whole part of that exploration process of evaluating, what do I think my kids need, and then being able to voice that is really important.
That would be, that's a great example, using empathy interviews. And then, for example, if people would interview Gen students, they're going to hear things like, well, I don't feel like my voice matters. I don't feel that my ideas are valued here. So what would happen, and you would gather that kind of, through the empathy interviews, that kind of feedback, and you would begin to then give that feedback like in a report form to all the staff. Like, this is what our students are saying. This is where the problems are lying according to them. And then what it does is it makes them, first of all, gain understanding. And the hope is that they would also have that desire, like almost like an empathetic response to it. Like, how could we help our students? We didn't know they were suffering that way. Let's come up with some solutions to that. And that's
but also follow through as a leader. Like, if your staff are saying, this is where I see a need, or this is where I see a problem, ask for suggestions and then actually put that into action, or find someone who's willing, or come up with solution, and at least try something that is going to be moving forward in the direction of what your colleagues are saying.
And that's really important, Jen, that the community sees that the leaders are listening and that they're then doing something about it, even if it's not like the perfect, the perfect, well planned out response, but they're doing something in response to hearing the needs of our community. It's really, thank you for bringing that up. And then another part of the exploration process, and let's see, Tamara, would you be willing to read this for us?
All right. Exploration process. Continue to use circles in staff and department meetings, as well as IEP meetings, parent meetings, and other school meetings when appropriate. Provide 2 to 3 hours of RJP orientation training that is experiential for staff, and gather training feedback from staff and ask how many feel this would benefit their school.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. So this is really that exploration process, and during that time, you can use circles in all these different ways, in IEP meetings, parent meetings, and other school meetings. You can also provide a little bit of orientation training. You're not really, at that time during the exploration process, you're not necessarily going to provide 2 full days of training or something. It's really about kind of providing a taste of it to see how staff respond. All right, thank you for that. And then, we're going to do this in small groups, but we want you give your opinion of what percentage of positive staff responses you would need to move forward with the whole school RJP initiative. And what would you suggest if less than 50% of the staff responses were supportive of implementing RJP? So, that kind of puts, I know this puts you that you have to really think about this. What would you do as a school leader if, you went ahead and you were thinking, what's the percentage of my sort of whatever that is, where it hits that line and you go, okay, I feel good about moving forward with this.
Installation and initial implementation. Provide training and support for a focused number of staff committed to implementing RJP. Collect baseline data and, as you progress, monitor classroom data, teacher observations, student behavior referrals, student surveys to measure if there is increased student engagement, improved behavior, and an increase in a sense of belonging and safety. Share the results of this data in future staff meetings.
Thank you, Lisa. And I know you just read this, Lisa, but is there any thoughts on this? Just kind of providing that for example, you made that decision as a leader because you've taken people through the exploration process and you got enough positive feedback to say, okay, at least a certain number, a focused group of our teachers really want to take this on. So you provided them really some good training, and you collected baseline data of what you feel you want to measure. It may be different than what I put down here, but this is the basic kind of stuff when it comes to that. And then you actually go through the process and begin to collect some post data as well and share those results of the data in the staff meetings. What's your thoughts on this?
I mean, it's such good stuff. And I think just for me, the key is that it is a process and that it is not top down, and that to be patient and to be very intentional about the process, that it's, not something to be rushed, but be really intentional and follow the process.
Awesome. I love that. I just don't rush, follow the process, be intentional, all of that. And then Jen Hansel, what you were saying earlier, just recently, you were saying it follows along with a lot of what we're seeing here, because this is a focus group of teachers, I guess those positive teachers you were talking about. But what do you think about this?
I guess I wrote down what Lisa just said. It's a process, be patient, be intentional. And I think that those three things are really important when you're trying to implement something new with a group of people. Sometimes you introduce something and everybody has their own time to process things. Sometimes I go to a training and a year and a half later, I'll think, oh man, this is where I'm going to use that. Like, it takes people time to process how that's going to work for them and how that works within their own. I use this for pedagogy because it's new information, and you might be learning new Google something or a new Schoology or a new platform or a format that you have to use right now with your kids. And this is something that's going to mull around in the back of your mind for a while until you figure out how it's going to work for you. And I think sometimes it has to come around a couple times for teachers to say, oh yeah, this totally makes sense. Like yesterday, I was saying, it's like the perfect storm for change right now. I feel like there are a lot of new teachers and there are a lot of veteran teachers. We had a lot of retirements this year and people who resigned and are rethinking their lives. And I think right now it's a big time of reflection. And so I think people are thinking about, how do I do things differently, or how can I do things differently to meet the needs of my students? And I think that thought of meeting the needs of my students is at the forefront of our minds now more than ever. And so I think it's just about teachers finding the time to reflect and us and leaders having the patience to let them have the time to figure out how that's going to work for them.
Wow. I like that, Jen. For leaders to really to create space for teachers to reflect, right? And it may even be part of their, who knows, maybe a staff meeting, they kind of give some time to reflect. And maybe some people like to ask people to journal down some ideas, different ways of reflecting and thinking. And then maybe small groups where they're having conversations. So, and then, like you said, be patient with this, but be, also vigilant. And I always say this, just because you're only kind of initially starting this implementation with a focus group of staff, it doesn't mean that you're stopping your circles in your staff meetings or in your IEPs or in your other department meetings, things like you can still continue to plant those seeds of really, it's a best practice anyway, as a leader to do that work. It's just that you're not saying to the whole school, I expect everybody to do this and do it now. It's more of a gradual implementation. When we focus on a full implementation, meaning you've gone through that initial implementation and installation, you now have made a decision. Okay, we're going to go to now teachers are buying in. They kind of maybe are have seen the results from the data that you've presented to them, and it's not just you as the leader, but it's a team of leaders. And so that's where we talk about really then developing a restorative justice practice school site leadership team. And that team really should kind of include in the people that you see here, like an administrator, a teacher, a counselor, or a social worker, a classified staff, a student. And I think Jen Hansel made me aware that you should probably bring in a parent as well. And I know sometimes it's difficult, but you want to try to be as inclusive as possible. And so as these people kind of are representative of parts of the whole school community, they also will, like, in some ways, the school looks and feels that their voice is there through them. And so that school site leadership team really should be the kind of the ones pushing sort of the agenda. Let me just go here. So, like, for example, that they're meeting at least monthly, but I would say maybe even twice a month, to ensure, that the RJP is actually the school priority. Sometimes if you don't have that group holding your feet to the fire, what happens is the restorative practices kind of get shoved to the back. And you want to make sure it's always on the staff meeting agenda. You always have a place for that. And that those people are the ones who are reporting out. Like, oh, we looked at this data, or here's some new data that we just found. We want to share it with everybody. And here's some things that came out. Here's a testimonial from this teacher who's been implementing, or we actually have a video of a student or a few students that we interviewed, and they are really just raving about this restorative justice practices. So it's kind of their way to kind of lead the charge in some ways. But they also are the one, they develop ways to provide the training and support and that support should include coaching and modeling, for all staff inside and outside of the classroom. Meaning, if you have a teacher who's, one of the people that's either trying to implement, or even one of them that's afraid to implement, and they're willing to have another teacher as part of this leadership team go into their class and actually model for them how to run a simple check-in or a small group kind of activity with the students in there, and then the students reporting back, just kind of demystifying for them by going in and saying, we want to support you. Right? That's our main thing. We're not trying to shove this down your throat. We want to help you. And then you tell us, what did you think of that experience? So, and making sure that essential data that measures the school's RJP progress is collected and shared with all staff. So this goes a lot to what I think what Tamara was really pointing out, that we need to develop these teams. And there's some things that no matter what happens, probably an administrator is going to have to do. But with this work right here, this group can do a lot, and it's a shared responsibility. Let's see. Hey, Jen Vermeulen, would you mind reading this for us?
Providing RJP crisis intervention support. Teachers are encouraged and supported to manage conflicts in their own classrooms. In cases when teachers need to send students out of the classroom for intervention support, make sure to include the teacher in the intervention as a way to restore their relationship with students and model RJP effective strategies for them to use in the future.
And Jen, what does that mean to you? I know you just read this, but just kind of, what does it speak to you?
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of times, right, that there's this RJP implementation on a campus, and maybe there's a particular leader or team that is kind of in charge of it, but then they almost get expected to be the ones to solve all the problems on the campus. And so, especially like the second point, I think it's really important to acknowledge that there might be a team that's leading this work, but that everyone needs to be involved in it. And so we really need to bring others into this work. And so like what it's saying, the second point, for instance, if there's a conflict in a classroom, that doesn't mean that just because there's another team that is kind of spearheading this work, that they just take care of it. Because then what happens is student leaves, that teacher doesn't know what the heck happened. And then they come back, and not only do they not know what happened with that student, but the main issue is that that relationship was broken or was severed in some way. And so that's what the focus needs to be on repairing. Otherwise, it just looks like, kiddo got to go to, this little hangout room, talk to someone, have a little chat, and then, come back with a lollipop or something. And so we really need to focus on the root of the problem, which is relationships being broken. And you can't do that if the people involved in the, or that were affected by that broken relationship are not involved.
That's awesome. That's exactly what I was thinking, Jen. So thank you for articulating that. And I did want to bring in Erica, if you're comfortable with this, because I know you are a social worker and you're obviously you're in that position a lot. Do you feel comfortable talking about this?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting point that Jen made about like sometimes it seems like the students go off and some teachers, I think, get upset that the student didn't have consequences, right? Like a punitive kind of consequences. And so again, it goes back to that, the outliers who aren't understanding the roots of restorative practices and how, the sort of reframing the question of, why'd you do that to me, to what happened to you kind of thing, and that the way they acted in class was a ripple effect from something else. And so they come out of class, they talk to me, and, then they're more regulated and can go back to class. But some teachers are still wanting, more the punitive.
Yeah. And Erica, let me just ask you a question. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I do want to ask you, have you had that experience of being able to bring the teacher into the restorative process?
So it's interesting. It happened just the other day. She's not a complete outlier, but I think she's kind of on the fence. And so her student wasn't able to do work, was crying, and came in and talked to me for quite a while, maybe 45 minutes, and just lots of tears and just a lot going on. And then we walked back to that teacher's desk, and I said, yeah, so I'll just call her Jane. Jane is so upset right now. She's got so much going on. And since math, is really challenging for her, and it's kind of the last thing she needs, it's not something that she has the temerity to face right now. So I'm going to walk over to the art room. She's going to work on her art project and all that. So sort of explaining what was going to happen to the teacher, but also using sort of that kind of language of this is why, it would be kind of a waste of this Jane's time to sit here crying at the math desk if she could be completing another assignment that's also going to bring some therapeutic value. So then the teacher responded, yes, completely, that I get that, and so bye, Jane,
That's fantastic. That's the example I was looking for when the teacher is brought into it and explained, like, this is what we're doing. Because if they don't get the explanation, the teacher might be like, well, why is so-and-so just like send them to art class? I mean, they can, all they're doing is they're going off their assumptions. And then they can even get upset with you, Erica, and it can create conflict even between a teacher and a person like you that's really providing that kind of crisis support. And so it's important, I think, everything you said. So that's what we're hoping. Like, if you have a person that's a restorative justice practices coordinator or a social worker or a counselor that's serving in that role, it's super important to bring the teacher on the inside of what's going on. You can't leave them. Don't allow them to just dump kids into your office and expect for you to fix them. It's good for you to do the practice of de-escalation. That's what we've learned, a lot of us in our our roles. But the idea is it's not just to de-escalate them, it's to de-escalate them and get them to see more clearly and be able to think more clearly so that the teacher and the student can restore their relationship. Because
I think though, Anthony, that in where I am, and I think that you've been to my school, it's very one-on-one, right? So it's very easy for me to walk the student to the desk and explain, to the teacher, because she's not teaching a whole class like this, right?
Yeah.
But in the other classes where it would be kind of an interruption to do that, I would just recommend doing the follow-up, right? So whoever has helped with the de-escalation or the conflict resolution or whatever's going on, to then, follow up with a text or email or a visit by that teacher's classroom and let them know, a little debrief.
Yeah. And Erica, though, because that would be really helpful if people just did what you said. If they just did that, it would eliminate so much of this resentment and things that I can see sometimes happen.
Us against them. And
yeah, because that's what I see. And now what some schools have done is that probably not at this point, because right now people are really hurting for subs, but they've had like a roaming sub. And for example, just as an example, Erica, if there was a situation where that student you were talking about, the one who had kind of like a math kind of trauma thing, it's like, but if it was even something more hurtful where she felt disrespected by her teacher and now you were dealing with her, maybe this person could go for 10 minutes, take over the class, kind of, just keep it going for the teacher, have the teacher be able to come out with you and you could kind of debrief them a little bit and then have a quick conversation where that teacher would have been taught through this restorative justice where this is the way we want you to relate with students when they're in these kinds of situations. And if they're with Erica, understand that they're going to be fragile. And so we want you to come in and express how much you care about them, how much you want them back at class, and that, if there's anything that you did to make them feel harmed, you apologize and you want to improve. Like if people would just learn that kind of language, kids would go, oh, wow. It would almost like this release, talk about de-escalation of drama, right? And then the student would probably feel a lot more comfortable now next time they have to go back to the class. They're restored. They feel valued. So I think, but the reality goes back to part of what Lisa was talking about is that sometimes, especially now, they're understaffed. So everybody's doing way too much, basically. And so we're in this reality of Lisa certainly doesn't have a roaming, sub to go take over that class. So how are they going to be able to communicate? But that's a thing that can be brought to the staff in a staff meeting to bring that exact example and to be able to say, look, this is our reality, but kids are still going to melt down. They're still going to have to leave class. They're still going to go to Erica's room. How should we develop a communication system so that we can be effective at helping these students get through this and then restoring their relationship with the teacher? Because that's where the crux is right there. The relationship with the teacher. That's who they're going to see every day. That's who they're going to relate with every day. And part of this, I guess, what I would call the restorative justice practices site leadership team is to help the school come up with strategies, right? To look at these as real problems and even be able to role play some of those problems. So just think about some of those things. We've talked a lot about this implementation science, right? You know, we looked at how we want to first go into from exploration first. We don't want to just jump in and say, hey, we're all gonna just implement restorative practices here, because remember, there's a lot of trauma that teachers and staff have felt when they feel that authorities push things down their throat. I hear it a lot. And I'm telling you, there's trauma connected to it because it feels very oppressive to them. And so we need to take them through the process where they will ultimately see the benefit of this, all those things that we talked about planting the seeds and beginning to show them the data, and having, you know, come up with a smaller group of committed people willing to pilot and then show the results of that, right? Show the data, show the real results of it, and share that freely with all the staff, and then get more buy-in, and then more teachers involved and bought into it, to where you get that full implementation. And then you have that restorative justice practices leadership team, right? That's made up of a diverse group of professionals, including though students maybe, and a parent at least, to have that voice in there. So just think about some of that, and then maybe just like if anybody would like to share kind of any of your thoughts on that, about this kind of this model, this implementation model. And I know it's been a lot, but I want to ask Lon, would you be willing to kind of comment on this?
I sure would. You can count on me for a hot take. I was just thinking about, I was just really appreciating kind of what you were saying about the initiative thing, because I think I've said that in my own way as well, as like, you know, how reforms or initiatives typically attempt to happen. And so, you know, I think approaching it with this way of like, I'm not going to like try to just jam this on you and try to get you to do it, because it's ultimately not helpful, especially if this is an approach that requires authenticity, right? It requires, when we say that this is a way of being, I think we have to model that in everything, how we lead, how we are with other people, and understand that there are kind of traumas, or, you know, there's a term, it's like organizational trauma, right? A lot of people, like, you know, I've been in schools where the staff was like, this sounds really cool, but when's the funding going to dry up? You know, and they should very rightfully feel that way, because that's just the pattern of education. We don't have the patience to fund something. We don't have the patience to like see it through. And that's not like individual people's problems. It's more like a reality. And I think calling that out is really helpful. And then another thing I was thinking about was, you know, it kind of goes back to the question you posed earlier about like, if you gave a survey to staff and asked about like how on board were they, and it was like less than 50%, it's like, how would you feel about at certain percentages? And I was just kind of thinking about how we don't have to wait for everyone to get on board to like move forward. And that if we're really about what we're saying we're about, people are going to want to get on the train. Now, some people are very eager to try and experiment. And I think about that. I don't know if you've ever seen that curve. It's like the theory of the diffusion of innovation, which basically has this like kind of like, I don't know, what do you call it? Like a standard distribution curve. And basically there's like people at the beginning that are like, hoorah, let me go, let me do this. And then as you get kind of, you know, more towards the middle of the curve, you have like something called early majority and like late majority. But those people take time. They need to watch other people do it. And then they can then be convinced by them. And then like the late majority needs to like watch the early majority and be like, okay, well, what's going on over there? It seems like they're really having a good time over there in that classroom. And then there's like the laggards. And we tend to spend so much time on the laggards, but they're actually like a smaller percent, the people who will like never truly come along. So I was just thinking about that it's a good approach to, really just getting people on when they're ready. And if not ready, then let's have some patience, and the more you have these practices in your faculty meetings, the more authentic ways that they'll get to, you don't need to explain it or logic it. They'll get it. They'll like experience it in their body. And I think that that's what's missing. And so just being patient with people. I mean, I've, and I'm sure you've had this. I've had some really hard people kind of go, oh, I get it. So there's always hope. So.
All right. That's great, Lon. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Jen Hansel, anything?
I kind of just put it in the chat. I think Lon just kind of put what I was trying to say earlier into perspective in a more formulaic way. Just, yeah, there's always going to be those naysayers. And eventually you'll get your 75, your 80% of staff who are on board and need to see it work and need to see how that's going to work for them. And, Lon, I exactly, she said it exactly how I think. Yeah.
I love it. That's fantastic. We love hearing that. Thank you, Jen. And Tamara, what about you?
I agree with everything. I've really enjoyed listening to everybody's perspective. I was trying to think about this process, and it said like the first steps, like engagement, right? I think a needs assessment before you even let anybody know what you're talking about. Just survey the community and say, hey, are you having any troubles here? Do you think this would be beneficial? Before, like, just a whole need assessment to kind of gauge where people are. And sometimes they might say they want these things, and so they feel like they contributed when you do, like they were there at the very beginning. Yeah. And they were part of it from the start because they said, yeah, we need these types of things. Yeah, restorative practices sound great. Then they're already on board, and then it might be easier to.
You're right, Tamara. I think, and really that is what you just said is kind of the key for this implementation science. What they recommend is more what you're saying is like, kind of do your needs assessment at the beginning and bring them along with you. Don't just go like read a book and then get excited and tell them that they have to do something. Bring them along, and you'll find it's a process, just like what everyone's been saying. It's a process, and you don't have to have everybody on board. You can have a minority, and I think Lon also explained that quite well. So thank you.
Yeah, and one other thing is if you get their information and then present it in like charts, they can see their little opinion and how it was compared to other people's, and they still feel valued even if you don't go with their opinion because they see there was a majority of other opinions.
That's a good point. That's a great point, to represent everybody on some kind of visual.
Yeah, they all get heard that way, and they see that they were heard.
Yeah, that's great. I did want to say, sometimes, we have to be careful because like when we think, I had somebody just actually yesterday, tell me, oh, Anthony, it's okay, just, call on your department members and they can help you get that stuff done. And the reality is like, it's not as easy as it may seem, right? And a lot of people depend on me, and they depend on me personally. And so, that's the thing about when you're in those positions where you've developed these relationships with certain people, then it takes a while for other people to develop those relationships with them. And so it's one of those things. It's just, I think it partly is, I think what Lisa was referring to is like, hey, you're in that position and there's a lot that falls on you. And so we just want to honor that. And, again, thank you all for your service. It's a lot harder than it seems, I know. Tamara, would you be willing to read this where it says adjust the master schedule?
Adjust master schedule to provide teachers. Let me move this. provide teachers with time to implement relationship and community building circles, develop an advisory period once per week where RJP relationship building and SEL are priorities, ensure that time is allotted for professional development and community of practice time to share and learn from each other about successes and challenges of RJP.
Thank you, Tamara. And Tamara, is there anything in that you just read that kind of popped out at you at all?
I love the advisory period and of course, making the time so that, teachers can really try to implement these community building activities.
Absolutely.
But the advisory period would be really supportive at least once per week because they're getting it regularly and then they could reflect on it weekly and then that way it becomes more a consistent practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And many teachers have communicated to me. It's like they're like, yeah, I would do this work. I would, but I just don't have the time. I've heard that many times actually from teachers. So yeah. And Jen Hansel, do you have any comments on this at all?
It was interesting because over COVID, our schedule radically changed from what it typically is. It became a modified quarter system, and we implemented advisories. And our staff had been very resistant to changing our schedule to be able to build in advisories into our regular day. And I found it myself. I just think it was a great place to have conversations with kids that you wouldn't typically have those conversations. And, admin and the district made sure that we had lesson plans provided for us. I think it also provided admin and counseling an opportunity to reach out to the students when they wouldn't normally have that time to begin with, and it allowed the teachers to facilitate that time. So I think it built relationships in where there wouldn't typically be time to build those relationships. So I saw it work. So again, I feel like this is a time where we could survey the staff and say, hey, what did you think about this time period? What did you like? What did you not like? Would you like to see this implemented? Would you be willing to change our school schedule for this? Just get some feedback from teachers fresh on the heels of some changes that had been put into place over COVID, just to see what they thought. I think it would be interesting to see what they said.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and what I like is what, you just confirmed that what this says on this slide is really what's needed, right? Because you were like, hey, it gave us that focused time, the advisory period to be able to really build relationships with our students. And I think it's important that we who are in leadership, that we listen to our teachers and kind of go, let's now come together and think of a creative way, right? That we might be able to adjust the master schedule that still gives you that content time that you need, but it really gives you this space to be able to focus on this work. So thank you. And then Jen Vermillion, do you have any comments at all about this?
Well, kind of building off of what we were just talking about, and then also just earlier on, we were talking about the necessity and really the power of making sure that multiple voices are given the opportunity to kind of come to that table. I know whenever I go into a school, usually I'm going into a school as an outsider from that school. So it's even that much more important for me to really start the conversation with, well, what's working well? Where are you seeing successes? And not just at this campus, but if you've taught at another school, like what worked really well there? Where did you see success there? Even if it was not from you, but maybe from some colleagues. And so really starting the conversation off there, because that's a great point of, even in this time of COVID, there were, obviously, even as a parent, I could see like lots of challenges from, the education side of things, but there's also things that did work well. And so if we can, even if our structure is a little different, pull in or replicate some of the things that were working well for us, then not only are we not, starting from ground zero, but we're also acknowledging just that shared wisdom of the group too, acknowledging that as leaders, we're not coming in telling you, one, we know exactly what you're going through, and we have all the answers, and we're going to fix everything. But it's more of a group mentality of, what, as a group, as a community, as colleagues, we're going to work to make this better together. So I think really starting there.
That's great. Thanks. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. So I want to now go to this next slide, and then Lisa, would you be willing to read this one for us?
Order supplies to support RJP. Order RJP books such as The Little Book of Restorative Justice in Education and Circle Forward. Organize time for circle reflection and discussion after reading RJP books and articles. Order supplies such as talking pieces, centerpiece cloth, and other supplies to support RJP.
So Lisa, and I know, you're an administrator, so, like some of these things, would you be open to any of these things that you see here?
Absolutely. I feel like I'm at a learning curve because I didn't know this was part of a 6-part series until you said it. So I do remember going to a training about 3 or 4 years ago, but I definitely am not, didn't participate in the series. So I'm behind, and I would definitely look into more trainings and ordering supplies.
That's great. Thank you. See, and that's what I love, like, about people like yourself that just open-minded and willing to be flexible and figure out, hey, maybe there's something I can take from this and order something. I don't have to order like books for everybody. Maybe you just order some and then lend them to people and see what they think, and might catch a little bit of fire. Maybe that people recommend that everybody should have this book or something. And that the Little Book of Restorative Justice in Education is quite inexpensive. The Circle Forward book is more, it's kind of thick and big, but it's way more expensive, but it has a lot of great ideas about circles, different ways to use circles, and different circle prompts. It seems like hundreds of them. It's amazing. So just think about doing things like this if you're in that position. And I think one of you mentioned, even if you're not an administrator, you could also start kind of like a little bit of a book club type of thing. You're a leader, so you can get colleagues together to just share articles, share books, and have them really, discuss those things, because it really generates ideas and thoughts, and there's some challenging things that go on, but it's quite good. People need it. And then and I've noticed that some people appreciate, educators appreciate, like, she provided me with the centerpiece cloth because she wants me to kind of develop there's a centerpiece activity that we like to do sometimes. And it's very engaging, whether it's with staff or with students. Every time I've done it, it's been extremely engaging and community building. People find commonalities. So just think about things like that. And then we say integrate RJP with other school initiatives, right? And I think you all have been saying some of these things that I see here, like, hold SEL and PBIS activities in circles. And I think, honestly, one of the big pushes in this past, couple of years, I would say, is SEL. And it's kind of, in some ways, almost feeling it's kind of like mandated. And so if they're creating an advisory period, it's probably expected that you kind of have an SEL lesson. But
what's an SEL?
Oh, I'm sorry. Social emotional learning.
Oh, okay. I talk about it, social emotional learning, but I never make it SEL. So
okay. Thank you. I appreciate when you people like you, Tamara, ask me those things, because sometimes I just make that assumption. So the cool thing is that so many of these things, whether they be character development activities or lessons or SEL or PBIS, or they can be held in circles, and you can even do content, so, when it's appropriate, content in circles. You can break kids off into small circles and have them discuss history and literature and other things that you're teaching, and then come back to the large group and have a circle discussion about it. So there's all kinds of different things, including your tier 2 and 3 interventions. Honestly, I would say almost all of them should be held in circles. And then I think we mentioned earlier IEP meetings and parent meetings. I've helped some principals with their parent meetings, and it was the first time that those parents had ever sat in circles, and they loved it. And then every time the director or the principal would say to me, "Oh man, I'm going to hold all my meetings like this." I'm like, "Great, you can do this," right? It's a thing that circles are a wonderful part of the restorative practices. And so I'm thinking, what are 2 practical ways that RJP can be integrated into your current school initiatives, right? So like, if you're thinking about different initiatives that you're at, either a school that you were at or that you're currently at, what might be a way to be able to say, hey, we could integrate circles into that, or we could integrate another part of a restorative justice practice into that kind of initiative. Erica, do you have any ideas on that?
I was actually thinking about sort of keeping my eye out for some sort of staff conflict, however small. And then, at the next staff meeting for that site, talking to the principal and say, can we start with a circle and a talking piece and like go through the whole thing and talk about what had happened. But then I was thinking, well, maybe that kind of feels like an ambush. But my point with it was to sort of have them experience it without, knowing what it was. And then at the end, like, you just, took part in restorative justice, and how does that feel? Do you think you could use it with your students? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So Erica, that could be a great idea. The only thing is that when there has been conflict, you definitely then want to do preparation. So that means you like, for example, meeting with them separately and then asking them the questions that you're going to ask them in the large group. And then, basically saying, we're trying to be more transparent. We're trying to create healing spaces for people. And so at our next meeting, we're going to come together, and the principal's going to be there and everything. But I feel already, by just talking to you, you're already ready to give some great information. Now, if one of the staff was to say, I certainly do not feel comfortable, I don't feel safe, I don't feel, then you have to really question whether to try to force them to come together in that way, right? So, I think you've got the skills to do all this, but at least in this restorative practices kind of paradigm, you have to do that pre-work to recognize and assess whether it's going to be successful or not. And because you don't want to put yourself in the hornet's nest and make, in some ways, more harm, because then, people will lash back at that. So Lon, what about you?
What I can think of off the top of my head was a program with the school I was working at called Leader in Me. And it was basically about developing leaders. This was like at the elementary level, and kind of building empowerment. And so I think part of my work going into that school was helping them to see the overlay, because they had been doing this work with Leader in Me curriculum, right? Which was like, helping yeah, like empowering young people. And so it's like, well, how is that related to like a restorative mindset? It definitely is, right? And so kind of seeing those two things as connected. And then like one of the other thoughts I kind of have about SEL, and not that I don't want to say I have a problem with it. I want to say I have a challenge. And for me, the challenge is like, I feel like what, restorative work does that like SEL doesn't necessarily accomplish is like, it gives a why. Why do we need to be well? Like, what is that? And like, if we really get back to the justice part and restorative justice practices, it is because, especially Black and Brown students in our schools have been marginalized, right? And so that was the genesis of this movement. And sometimes I worry about, yes, definitely it works well with these other movements and these other initiatives. And I'm really more than happy to play well with them, especially as it comes to like, making sure that it actually can like reach more young people. But I do sometimes worry about how we kind of decenter the justice orientation of this Work. It's because who's dealt with the discrimination in schools. And so it's both a statement, a question, and a wondering at the same time. Yeah. Something I'm grasping with because so
that's well said, Lon. Thank you for expressing that. And one of the things that we like to say is when you have an authentic circle and people get to have a true voice, a lot of those issues will start to come out. So some of the oppression, some of the harm that our own students and even our own staff have experienced in life will start to come out. And what it does is it really is a kind of a model of education, like where people are listening, but they're listening about real stories and they're beginning to grow in understanding in ways they hadn't before, and they grow in empathy. And the hope is that they can also begin to grow in compassion, right? To be with them and kind of, walk with them through some of their struggles. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And then Lisa, any thoughts on that?
I'm definitely going to try on the circles with staff meetings. And, I think that will elevate and be just accomplish a lot just from hearing everyone share about that. And I just was really, Lan just makes me think whenever she speaks. It's like, just stuff starts spinning in my head. So I'm just still kind of processing what she was just talking about, with justice being at the center of it. And so I'm processing.
That's good.
And I'm sure I'm going to have some thoughts afterwards.
Yeah, I really appreciate how you think also, Lisa, how you take time to really consider and reflect and give yourself the time that you need. I really like that. So thank you. And Jen Hansel, any thoughts on how integrating the restorative justice practices into initiatives?
Leading with dignity, I forget who brought that up yesterday, by Donna Hicks. It's actually free if you have an Amazon Audible account. It's free. So I'm going to look that up and check it out and listen to it when I have some time. I was just typing that into the chat as you asked. But I think any resources that we can share with each other, that we can bring back to the table, all of those are awesome. So I'm going to check them out for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Jen. And Tamara?
Yeah, I've been looking into a lot of initiatives lately, and the Safe Schools Initiative is huge, and it's all about cyberbullying prevention, restorative practices, conflict resolution, and that's what I'm really big on, and that's where a lot of funding is going. So like safe schools.
Yeah.
And of course, equity and inclusion, because these practices are equitable and inclusive.
That's fantastic, Tamara. And I love the fact that you're even thinking about like that bigger picture of like, how can we use even circles, for example, to get people to talk about these issues of cyberbullying, creating a safer school environment. I mean, really bringing the community together. The whole thing with the restorative work is you're bringing the community together to also tell them we value your voice, your ideas. Like, we can't solve this alone. We need the community to help the community. It can't just be like one person, oh, I'm a TOSA, so I'm going to now fix all the problems. It doesn't work that way, right? You got to organize and hear the voice of the people. So one of the things that we like to promote is role playing challenging situations, right? So Tamara, would you read this one for us, please?
Okay, role-playing challenging situations. Develop role plays of different challenges that educators are facing during RJP implementation. Have experienced RJP practitioners model in role plays how to effectively and restoratively communicate. Provide targeted skill building for those demonstrating the need for support.
Thank you, Tamara. And so I don't know if you've seen kind of role plays used in some of the, and have they been helpful, or how's it been?
So I've seen some funny role plays where, everybody acts out their part. Sometimes I think those sometimes they can be silly.
Yeah.
It's really important how they're done. And I really like just giving turns to each person to try it out, but not like putting everybody out in front of the whole group. I don't know. Role playing it has to be done a specific way.
Yeah, you're right. So thank you, Tamara. And I think Tamara's right in the sense that you got to be careful about like putting people too much on the spot, right in the middle of all, like a whole circle or something. But one of the things that I've used is I've done like pair shares or triad shares where people are role playing just in a small group. They feel much more, much safer and willing to try things when it's just 2 or 3 people at the max. And so you might want to think about how to get people to practice some of these practices, right? But one of the things that we recommend is having people bring you some challenging situations. Like, for example, if they were saying, well, yes, I had, this situation where I wanted to check in with a student and all they did was pass every time. So what you do is you set up a role play where you have an experienced practitioner kind of model for them. This is a way that you might be able to have a conversation with that student, maybe just one-on-one. Maybe you might talk to them about how important it is for you personally to hear from them because they're important to you. They're an important human being, and how they feel that day when they're doing the check-in is important to you. So you might want to just kind of like have people think about like bringing different sorts of challenges and then role playing them out, because people do need practice, because the old saying, practice makes perfect. So if people are just hearing about something or reading about it or becoming inspired by something, it doesn't mean that they're going to be good at it, because you have to practice it before you get good at it. And it's much better to practice it on a lower level, non-drama, situation where you're just practicing something, because when you get into the situation where there is high level of angst and drama, it can your own buttons can be set off, and so you want to practice it, with colleagues. So yeah, just think of ways. Yeah, please.
The experienced practitioner, that's going to be the challenge, to have that person available on each campus and each site. Because I don't know, we didn't have one at my last site that I felt. So I don't know, that was just last year. So maybe, that's a great
Yeah,
thing, a starting point
that's a good
is
point,
to try
Tamara.
and get every site to at least have one RJP practitioner, right?
Yeah, that would be a great thing to have at least one person and maybe even a team of people that are working at a site to be able to, grow and read and talk and challenge each other. But they grow together, and then when these things come up, they can model these kinds of things. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
And then support for teachers in the classroom, and just want to ask Jen Hansel, would you be willing to read this one for us?
Sure. Provide additional training and support for teachers experiencing difficulties implementing RJP. Provide modeling for teachers in their classroom to learn effective circle facilitation skills. And provide a mentor assigned to provide additional support to struggling teachers. Check in, troubleshooting, additional modeling.
And Jen, what's your kind of reaction to just what you just read?
I guess as someone who people look to kind of provide support, I'm wondering, how do I become, or how do I, an experienced practitioner? I mean, I've been to a lot of training of teachers or whatever that is, where we are trained to be the teachers of teachers. And I just wonder if there's a program through SDCOE or somewhere that we can actually be approved or certificated or something to become an experienced practitioner, so we can kind of be that leader for our campuses.
Oh, that's a good point. You're probably a lot more skilled than you would admit right now. Because I just get that sense from you that you have everything I've heard from you is very, well thought out, and I think you have a lot of experience because you brought a lot of richness to this training. And but I think you're right that even people like yourself who are quite skilled might benefit from having some kind of a program that they could be a part of that really helps them hone their skills and feel more confident. Or
even a curriculum, you know what I mean? Like something that is kind of out there already that I could take back to like a professional development team and say, okay, guys, how do we think this is, how do we want to try to implement this on our campus?
Okay, good. Yeah. And now are you talking kind of like almost like a training of trainers?
Yeah, like that's what I'm thinking. Like if it would be nice if, like our district already has set aside these TOSAs, like what if we all went through a program where we were trained to be these people for our district?
Yeah.
And then there would automatically be one at every site.
Well, if like just as an example, one thing I wanted to say is when things like that come up, Jen, and anyone here, if you say, hey, I'd like to, maybe if all of our TOSAs could be trained in this in a kind of a deeper level or something, that's something I would be interested in helping with. And so what I would want to say is just reach out to me. You could talk to your colleagues, and then, I'll be happy to try to help with that. And that goes for any of you. Like, I want you to know that, obviously we have limited time here in these training sessions. But I want you to really know that I really value when you reach out and you say, hey, I have a question for you on this, or this came up. What would you suggest on this? Or would you be able to train all of our TOSAs or something like that? Because my answer is typically yes. That's what I try to do as much as I can, unless it's just impossible for me. But I'll bend over backwards if I can to serve you, Jen, and any of the colleagues that we have here, and any of the ones who have gone through our trainings as well. I think people know that that we want to be able to support you more than just provide this training. So thank you for that. And then, so really we're coming to the end now, and just wanted to kind of open this up to any questions or concerns about, like, we went over a lot of different things today, but just when you think about implementation and sustainability, And it's almost like what Jen just brought up right now. Like, hey, we would like to kind of develop our skills at a deeper level, or if these TOSAs could be prepared so that they could really feel more confident and prepared. Something like that is what I'm thinking about. Like, if any questions or considerations that you want to bring up.
I was just thinking about how cool it would be for specifically, at least one of the gaps I've seen in available expertise. Not that it doesn't exist, it's just a little bit more hard to come by. Is like these collaborative groups for school leaders trying to implement restorative practices. And to me, I see that as a really big need, because the implementation science of it all that we touched on is what a lot of school leaders struggle with. How do I do it? How do I approach it? And so I think in my past role, I did want to kind of create these like monthly meetings where like we're holding space for administrators who are oftentimes, I feel like, at least from my perspective, I feel like they're dehumanized sometimes, and so like, how can we grow, like plant seeds with them while holding space for them as well? It's kind of to me like a waterfall, right? Like hold space, let them experience it, share ideas, get to hear from other school leaders. And it's like a nurturing space, and then they can go and then like plant some more seeds of their own. And then, it's like so I guess that's just kind of what comes to mind. And I think the last thing is, when I think about the paradigm of restorative justice, I'm thinking about how it's really deep and asking us to be different. And just really like everything between the way we look at each other to how we operate, and like asking ourselves that question, like what in our school cultures is preventing us from realizing this?
Exactly.
That's the question to me. So,
that's the question to me too. Exactly. Because that's, I think, why I took these trainings, is to see where is the disconnect between, these are wonderful. I've been learning about these for, oh my gosh, 9 years, if that's as long as Anthony's been doing it. And still, I'm not, seeing it. And so I guess my patience has worn because it's 9 years in the making.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's why I come off a little impatient, probably.
Yeah, that's good point. And I do encourage you to come to our monthly, we have that collaborative meeting. It's a monthly meeting, and I encourage you to come, because what you may find is out of that, who knows, maybe something can be developed just for administrators or leaders or something. But many of the people who have attended, they are leaders, and definitely either administrators or they're just leaders in the fact that they're promoting this. They've been promoting this for a long time. And there's some really great people out there doing the work, and they're very committed to it. But you like, that's the thing, you almost have to be at their school to be able to experience that. So yeah, but we definitely encourage you to come to that. That's one thing that we definitely are committed to, having the monthly meetings. Yeah, we appreciate all of you and all the work that you do, your commitment to try to improve our schools, especially for our kids. Amazing work. So have a great rest of your afternoon. And if you can do our little survey quickly, that we appreciate that, but just go and have a great evening.